This is Pixelated Audio, and you're listening to Wolfchild. All right, welcome back to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game audio, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene.
Hey, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about and playing music from the game Wolfchild. It's such a good-selling game that it ended up on 7 different platforms. Eat that, Mario.
Yeah, it made its way across the gamut, and I'm always kind of curious why. It's an okay game.
Stay tuned, listeners. You're going to find out directly from the horse's mouth on this one.
Yeah.
At least a written interview from the creator of the game or one of the creators of the game.
Right. So we usually like to start with like a title track or something, but the track that we came in with was the stage select theme. It's really got this nice jazziness to it. It doesn't fit anything you would expect from Wolfchild, but this is the Sega CD version. So we're going to jump right into the title screen music from the Amiga version composed by Martin Iveson. And this is a classic that I remember pretty well. So let's take a listen. All right, that was the title screen from the Amiga version of Wolfchild, composed by Martin Iveson. And this is 80s power ballad all over it, especially at that, 2-minute mark?
It's Shadow of the Beast. It's classic Amiga. I mean, this is one of the first two versions that came out. It kind of set the scene for the rest of the soundtracks. I really like this title theme, even if it's a little crunchy.
Oh, I think it's great. I think mostly because of the nostalgia factor. I hear this song and I'm like, oh yeah,
that's true.
Wolfchild.
We haven't done much Amiga stuff in a while. We've been kind of neglecting some of the British computers lately.
We got plenty in here, so
that's true.
We're making a comeback.
Today we got all of the consoles, all the platforms, every war you could imagine. Atari ST versus Amiga, Super Nintendo versus Genesis. We got something for everybody.
Yeah. So tell us about Wolfchild, Gene.
So sure, Wolfchild is a Seattle-based cinematic folk rock band. No. Wolfchild is a furry mascot platformer. Well, no, not quite. Well, it is a standard Euro platformer with a touch of Altered Beast. You control a werewolf that fires projectiles across a standard 5 stages, 4 on the portable platforms and 8 on the Sega CD. So it's kind of if you've played an action platformer, you know what this is pretty much.
You know what it reminds me of? I always had this feeling when I was playing it. So I was a really big fan of like Kung Fu or Kung Fu. Yeah. And the mechanics for like punching. So, you go from the man form to the werewolf form. And when you hit the enemies, it's only like one hit shot. Unless it's like a boss or something like that, and they kind of like fly off the screen.
Oh yeah, it's got a lot of that to it.
So Kung Fu to me, and so it always kind of cracks me up because I played that game a lot, and I played this game a lot, and they always just kind of cross path all the time. So
yeah, it's definitely pulling on that same sort of thing of like you said, where your character's this super overpowered a wolf man, and you got to make your way through just hordes of enemies.
Right. So the game was originally released in the UK for the Amiga and the Atari ST in 1992, and then later went on to see a number of releases spread across about every region for Game Gear, Genesis, Sega CD, Master System, and the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, the game saw a lot of changes. I kind of mentioned it before. The Sega CD is sort of the definitive version, if you want to call it that, kind of the... this is a deep cut, but if anybody remembers the Earthworm Jim special edition or whatever it was that came out, where they had added a couple of levels.
Of course, it's sitting on my shelf right now.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, it's the kind of the mastered version of it, I guess. Or it's not really remastered. It's more of like the...
Yeah, they added a couple of stages and they changed the soundtrack. There's some similarities, but it kind of diverges pretty quickly. So as you'll hear, across these 7 different versions, we've got a ton of music. So I don't want to belabor this too long, but every version of the game was developed by Core Design. We'll talk about them. But the Amiga and the Atari ST versions were both published by Core. Game Gear, Master System, and Super Nintendo were published by Virgin. Mega Drive and Mega CD were handled by JVC Musical Instruments or Victor Musical Industries in Japan. And of course... our favorite tech toy handled the Brazilian release. They come up a lot at our show, actually.
Yeah, so I went back. It had been years since I played this game. I've listened to music many times, since then. But I first started back. So as prep for the show, I wanted to play through some of the stuff. And I was like, you know what? I never really played the Atari ST version. Yeah. And so I put that on, and lo and behold, I really expected the Atari ST version to be, I don't want to say subpar because it's not like a subpar system. The CPU in the Atari ST is actually pretty impressive at the time, but I was expecting a lot more, maybe even limited color palette, and I don't know, maybe just choppier frame rate. I don't know what I was expecting, but it actually was very well done, and it looks and plays just as well as any of the other versions pretty much. So that said, let's jump into the title screen from the Atari ST, and this was also composed by Martin Iveson.
That was the title screen from the Atari ST version of Wolfchild, composed by Martin Iveson, and pretty much the only piece of music in this version, actually. It's a lot of silence during gameplay, except for sound effects.
Right. The Atari ST, kind of a PSG favorite of mine. It's got 3 voices. It's basically the same. It's using the YM2149 49F variant, which is basically the AY3 8910, and it's got some really, like, if you listen to Impulse Project, we have played a lot of Atari ST stuff over the course of its life, and there's some really awesome stuff that has been done with the Atari ST. Now, this really is not the most impressive track by any means, but it does kind of convey some of the feeling that you get from, like, maybe the Amiga title screen in its own kind of way, right? Not sample based anymore, but it does kind of bring that almost, chaotic and darker feel to the game as you're booting it up.
Yeah, and I wanted to play this version because it's not really like any of the other ones. I don't think this song or this melody crops up anywhere else, so I figured...
Not the melody, but I think the tone, it kind of sets the tone the same. Aside from the Sega CD stuff, that doesn't...
I know what you mean. Yeah,
that.
like the character definitely conveys the sort of thing. I didn't play the Atari ST version, but I did play a little bit of the Amiga version, and I know it starts off with a really cool, like, werewolf transformation scene. So was that in there?
Yeah. Well, see, the Amiga version is always going to have a special place in my heart because I think with that I even played on using a keyboard. I don't even get me started on the Atari ST keyboard. It feels like you're typing on flesh, but it's definitely a very faithful version of it compared to the Amiga. It does feel and play very much the same way. The animations are great, and the style and all the colors and everything you would expect really shine on the ST.
I think we should jump into some more music before we talk about the company here. What do you think, Brian?
No,
I'm
just kidding. We're gonna,
okay. Well,
yeah. We're going to get into the Genesis version.
We are, yeah. So the Genesis version is very interesting because this one took quite a few liberties compared to some of the other versions of the soundtrack. So there's almost no 2 Genesis songs that sound exactly like the Amiga versions. They're quite different. So Matt Furniss is on point on this one. He bases a lot of his music very loosely in some ways on the Martin Iveson stuff. You can kind of hear the structure in there, but then he kind of goes off and does his own thing.
His own Furniss thing.
Oh, yeah. He's an MVP of the Genesis sound chip. I mean, that guy doesn't get nearly enough credit. All right, so here it is. This is the title theme one more time, now from the Sega Genesis.
So that was the title theme from the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive version, composed by Matt Furniss, which is, again, loosely based on Martin Iveson's version, but, the audacity of Furniss. Like, he took something that was already pretty cool, and he made it in his own way pretty cool. It's just, how dare he? Like, it's a really cool track. It's definitely different in every way. I don't even know how it's loosely based.
There's the backbeats kind of like somewhat like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's very, he always has this really amazing quality to take things and just reshape them. Especially because he has such powerful command of the Sega Genesis sound hardware. And so I think just being able to play with it and do what he does best always works for anything he puts out, whether it's, his own composition, like an original composition, or it's kind of a retelling of something that's already existing. So,
yeah. In a vacuum, I think this is probably my favorite version of the soundtrack overall. There are certain tracks that shine in every version, actually, for me. But I think, like, consistency-wise, this one's really strong. So if you're going to go back and listen to Wolfchild, if you aren't already sick of us talking about it by the end of this episode, this is the one to check out, for me anyway.
Yeah, play the game. Or don't. It's fine.
It's fine. It's a good way to pass the time in an afternoon. It's fun enough.
Sure. So let's talk about core design. Best known for kicking off the Tomb Raider series. You probably remember seeing that logo pop up and stay on the screen for far too long. And it just burns into my brain. Like every time I see it, the first few entries also worked on some fondly remembered games like Rick Dangerous and Jaguar XJ220, Bubba and Styx, Chuck Rock, and the Fighting Force series. Core Design Limited was a British video game developer based in Derby, England, founded May 1988 by former Gremlin Graphics employees, and it originally bore the name Megabyte until rebranding as Core Design in October the same year. The company was acquired by Central Gold in December of 1994, which in turn was acquired by Eidos Interactive in April of 1996. And then in May of 2006, Core Design personnel and assets were acquired by Rebellion Developments, and the company became Rebellion Derby, which was then shut down in March of 2010. So that's
mergers and acquisitions are really people's favorite part of our show. But it's interesting to note that they were already acquired by another company, Eidos, and then were still kind of Core Design as a sub-brand. But, we see that a lot around this era.
Yeah. Gremlin Graphics, too. We've talked about them many times on the show, partially because Barry Leach.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so their history has kind of peppered throughout the years on our show, but we haven't really talked about Rebellion Developments or even Rebellion Derby.
I don't know much about them, to be honest.
Yeah, what were they responsible for? I don't even know. But Core Design was founded by Chris Striegli, Andy Green, Rob Toon, Terry Lloyd, Simon Phipps, David Pridemore, Jeremy Heath-Smith, Kevin Norburn, and Greg Holmes, and most of them were former employees of Gremlin Graphics.
We're going to hear a little bit more from Simon a little bit later on in the show, but the studio was part of Center Gold when it was acquired by Eidos in 96. I like this quote. Jeremy Heath-Smith regarded the acquisition as a relief, commenting, "The funding of development is so expensive that I doubt we could have continued to fund ourselves as an independent company." So even in the 90s, they were, game dev was very expensive, and that's why you see all of these movements between companies.
Which is so funny because it was usually just a handful of people working on these things. You wouldn't associate that with this massive funding issue. But, nowadays we think more about like a few game devs as like an indie scene, right? Where they have,
they may have had like 30 people and it was like a huge company,
Exactly. So the company is widely known for Tomb Raider series, the success of the first Tomb Raider. I remember all the magazines.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And they were credited with making Eidos Interactive a major force in the industry. In September of 97, Sony Computer Entertainment America signed an agreement with Eidos to keep the franchise exclusive to the PlayStation console.
Sorry, Saturn owners. I think the first one ended up being on the Saturn and then
the first one was on the Saturn. I do have it. It's a little grittier than the PlayStation version, but not much.
Yeah.
Saturn wasn't really known for the 3D, so
Sure.
Whatever. I'd love to go back to that game. I haven't played it in so long. I wonder how it holds up.
I can't imagine it holds up that well, but they had a good thing going for a little while, but unfortunately in 2003, after the failure of Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness, Eidos put Crystal Dynamics on the property, so that's why you don't see core design after about the early 2000s. Right. And then, a lot of the core design members went off to another company called Circle Studio, but that was pretty short-lived when I looked it up.
Did you play The Angel of Darkness? I don't think I ever played that.
I played the original Tomb Raider. I think I might have played a little bit of 2. I kind of lost interest after the second one.
I only played the first 2 myself.
Yeah, so. I think that was pretty common, actually.
So let's get into another block of music here. We have Wolfship, and this is from the Amiga version, also composed by Martin Iveson.
That was Battle Cruiser, composed by Martin Iveson, also called Wolfship in like every other version. So, it's the first stage. It's a flying battleship, and they call it the Wolfship. What else can I say? I love this track. It's got such an infectious groove.
Me too. This is one of those kind of staples that you can go back to. It's really fun. It's chaotic. And, it's weird to me, though, because this track is kind of groovy and kind of poppy as it is. It doesn't really match the level so much. The level's a little less action-y than that, but maybe that's the whole game in general. So,
the music never quite fits in this game. It's like good for its own sake, which honestly, it's one of my favorite things about this era of gaming. Is it's like, I say this all the time. It's like somebody was just given a budget and they wrote some music. Nowadays, everything has to, ludo-narrative consonants. It has to fit the gameplay. Back then, you could just throw in a dance tune. You're Wolfman.
Yeah, who cares? You're man, and now you're a wolf. Yeah, good track. I think we should just keep on keeping on. How's the story? This is one thing I never really knew a whole lot about. I know you have some notes here, so tell us about the story.
I'm pulling this straight from somewhere, a wiki or something.
It's probably like the manual or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Kal Morrow, expert in genetic research and creation of human-animal hybrids, has been kidnapped and his family brutally murdered by the terrorist organization Chimera. His surviving son, Saul, that's you, takes it upon himself to avenge his family. Using his father's research, he turns into a man-wolf. Sorry. He turns into a man-wolf and sets out to... It's just a funny line. He turns into a man-wolf and sets out to find Chimera's base and defeat their leader, Karl Draxx, with 2 X's. That's where the term Wolfchild comes in, because you are the son of Dr. Kal Morrow, and you are a wolf man. Man wolf.
It didn't make it sound any better.
As Saul, it's your job to traverse 5 different areas on your way to Draxx. When Saul collects enough power-ups, he turns into his wolf form and gains a special psychic shot attack, which can be improved by collecting further power-ups. However, if Saul loses health, he turns back into his human form and only has his fists to fight the numerous enemies. That's sort of like the main push-pull mechanic. Like, you don't want to let your health get too low. It's kind of one of those old games where when you're doing badly, it punishes you worse.
Yeah, that makes it really hard. The worse you do, the more you get punished. And it makes it really... It kind of rubber bands the game in a way to where, when you're already struggling,
it's easier to take more damage, and you end up having a harder time getting your health back. But that is kind of the key,
that is the gimmick of the game. That is the gimmick of the game.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I have enough health, now I'm the wolf man again. But we are not going to get out of here without talking about that Wolfship at least a few more times, Brian. I'm ready to move on if you are.
Sure.
So this is the Genesis version of that same first stage. Let's hear Matt Furniss's take on the Wolfship.
All right, that was Wolfship for the Sega Genesis, composed by Matt Furniss, again for Wolfchild. And this is just even a better track. Honestly, it really is. I think it was improved upon so much. I think the guitar coming in early like that really gives it that much more. That kind of souling hammer on stuff like it just sounds so cool. Sounds so clean.
Nowadays, this would be kind of a common thing. Somebody would be like, hey, look, I sent you over this track. You want to just add on to it? And then it's like, oh, you got some good ideas. Let me throw in this bendy synth in there. And I just love this version of that track. And I feel like the sound patch design in here is just so rich. You've got really great use of stereo. You've got these just nice metallic bell synths. I love the timbre on the Genesis version. I
was gonna say that the bells when the guitar solo kind of peters out, it bends and finishes, then you get this really awesome panning from the bells in both ears, just really in your face. And that's something that we kind of heard in the earlier version that we played, but this is putting it to the extreme, right? This is not just dancing around a single channel. This is really kind of making this almost stereoscopic impression on you. I can't imagine how much better it would have sounded had I listened with headphones on as a kid because it's pretty impressive with headphones.
Yeah. I mean, eat your heart out, Sonic, right? I mean, this is such a great soundtrack. Well, at least the first half of the game is really strong. I feel like this track is like, is a classic game design, right? You put your best foot forward. I feel like Wolfship is my absolute favorite track in the game. That's not to say that there aren't still good tracks towards the back half, but you can tell they're like, who's really going to get to stage 5, right?
yeah. Who's actually going to remain there? Well, we have some tracks from Wolfship, actually, that...
yeah, baby.
I think we should play just some snippets, because I don't think we have to play the whole thing, but...
We'll be here all day if we did that.
Yeah, but Wolfship on the Sega CD has its own, flair, and then the Super Nintendo, too. So we should take a listen to both. Let's first listen to the Sega CD version. That was from the Sega CD, so let's listen to the Super Nintendo version.
Those were the Sega CD and then the Super NES versions of the Wolfship. First was composed by Martin Iveson, obviously using like that full Red Book audio, suite of synthesizers, and then Steve Collett with like $20 and the Super Nintendo's 200 kilobytes. I mean, he did an admirable job. His work was essentially take that Sega CD version, and
it's not bad.
No, it's really good for what it is, but it's like, when you hear it in context, it's like, he did the best he could with the tools that he had. That's a hard job.
What's your take on the Sega CD version in this case, other than it sounding just like general MIDI?
See, I think the Sega CD version for this track is a little bit less impressive than the original two.
I do as well.
It's nice, it's got a good character to it, but I feel like where the Sega CD version shines is in some of the later tracks where you just get that full on cheese. We're not quite there yet, but it's hard to compete with that Genesis version, I feel like.
Yeah. We do have some more music from the Amiga version, so let's jump into Jungle or Stage 2. That was the jungle theme, or stage 2, from the Amiga version of Wolfchild, composed by Martin Iveson. This one kind of cracks me up because every time I hear it, that later half where it just kind of has like the breakdown, the bass part reminds me of like a bullfrog, and then the chirping sounds. So I just imagine like these animals kind of just like all in tune doing their little animal singing or whatever. I don't know. It's a cool track though. It's definitely
When you're
cool.
in the jungle, maybe you did imagine that. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you're watching the road go by and you're like thinking that things are happening rhymically. I don't know. I don't remember if there were any little animals other than the enemies you fight in this one.
No, not at all. There were none.
No, I like the chirpiness of this track.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's a neat little groove.
Yeah. So digging around the internet, you found something that I read last night, and I thought it was really interesting. It was a blog post from Simon Phipps. We talked about him earlier as one of the kind of core members. And there's some really interesting tidbits that he threw in about the game and its development.
Yeah. So I don't know how many times I searched the word Wolfchild in Google over the last 2 weeks, but I ended up stumbling across this. It was, I think, either on the first or second page of results. And I was like, oh, cool, a blog post. I feel like probably somebody has some fond memories. But no, Simon was one of the original founders of the company. He was there from about 1989 to about 96. And he's been active in the game industry until about the 2010s. So it's not like he left the games industry, just kind of moved on a little bit. He worked on games like Harry Potter during the GameCube era, Need for Speed, Most Wanted in the PS3 era, mostly on the design side of things. But for Wolfchild, he was kind of an all-arounder. He started off he's credited as utilities, scroll programming, graphics, and design for the Atari ST. And then literally for every other version, he's listed as graphics and design, so the 6 other versions.
Yeah, so what's interesting, he might have mentioned this in the blog post or maybe just on the website in general, but he originally was just like a program, kind of all around in the industry, and utilities, programming, graphic design, all of the above. And then slowly kind of shoehorned his way as games got more of a budget, found he was doing more graphic design, and then pigeonholed himself into graphic design. So later ended up not really working on the programming side so much.
Yeah. There's a quote in there somewhere, which is basically like, it was a common refrain that as the project got bigger, he'd sort of like, oh, the project's gotten too big. You need to specialize on this and do less of some other things. So yeah, seemed to be a thing that happens a lot in the games industry. But I thought this was pretty funny. This is kind of the origin story of the game. So Wolfchild began as an idea in November of 1990. It was apparently slightly inspired by, they had a coworker who wore a belt that on the buckle said the words Wolfchild on it.
Yeah, I read that. That was funny.
Very strange. And so they envisioned the game as a man wolf, which I never get tired of saying, stalking across a post-apocalyptic future, which would be inhabited by giant mutant insects. So almost literally like Shadow of the Beast. But I guess they went away from that.
Well, he wanted to do some more like almost serious themed games. He was doing a lot of like more cartoonish style stuff.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I actually have really fond memories of is Rick Dangerous, and the game is it's cartoony, and he did some other stuff that's very much like based on animated stuff. But this was the first one that was like, hey, let's take this to the next level. Let's make it more of like a serious take on gaming rather than just something cartoony and silly.
Yeah, exactly. So, instead of a Sonic game, something a little bit more gritty, I guess you would say.
So let's jump into Matt Furniss' take of the jungle theme on the Sega Genesis. That was the Jungle theme, Stage 2 from the Genesis version of Wolfchild, composed by Matt Furniss. It's kind of based on Martin Iveson's version, but honestly, it's very different. And I gotta appreciate the laddering of the notes in there, the kind of roll up from the right side of your head to the left. The echo in there, it's really cool. Having the guitar jump right in is also really impressive. I'm missing my bullfrogs and my little squirrels chirping, but still a really cool track.
Yeah, it's almost like a more serious take on that last track. And I mean, you know what's funny about the Matt Furniss tracks is I think he's a little bit more judicious with the use of melody in a weird sort of way. Like, I feel like if you actually pay attention to his tracks, he has a lot of really good grooves, but he doesn't have like a lot of melodic stuff the way the Iveson tracks do. There's a lot more like noodling melodies and stuff like that, but he deploys them in just the right way. It's just like there's that part around 40 seconds in where it's like do 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 do. It's just like so good.
Yeah, I don't think I think this is a much better fit for the game. This track to me, if I was gonna kind of mentally map it to something in a game, it would be more of almost like a Western theme for a second, because there is
I can see that.
Some kind of, guitar flanges and stuff that just give it this kind of, I don't know, I guess kind of like Dusty Trail vibe.
Yeah, almost like the loner entering
exactly,
town, the stranger or whatever it is. Yeah. Simon goes on to say on this one, which I think is kind of interesting, that Capcom's Strider had come and gone, so they changed their direction a little bit, which is why there's a lot more verticality to it than maybe they had initially discussed. And they had apparently a futuristic take on the island of Dr. Moreau. He writes ahem in here because the character's name is Saul Morrow. Yeah. And so there's 5 stages: the Wolfship, or the Sky Galleon, Jungle, insect-filled temple, and then Draxx's lair, essentially. And he kind of talks about it, which is like, we actually brought it up earlier, that whole push-pull mechanic of like getting enough health and then you can turn into your wolf form. He doesn't really have anything terribly exciting to say there, but it does feel, I actually kind of get what he's saying, that it does feel satisfying to like have that, like, come on, I just need like one more piece of health and then I can be the wolf again.
It's a very typical game mechanic. I want to go back to what you were saying with verticality. What do you mean by that? Because I think I understand where you're going with that, but I want to clarify.
I did play the game, and most stages involve kind of like think of like an S shape. You go
hopping around, yes.
Yeah, you go up and then you go over, then you go down, you go over, you go up. It's kind of a lot like that. And instead of just going in a straight line, like even I kind of drew some comparisons to Vector Man too, which has similar kinds of characteristics.
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up Earthworm Jim earlier, and that's very much in the same vein.
Yeah. So it's not just like jumping over a gap or something. It's kind of like you jump up from side to side, and then you're kind of traversing an area with a bunch of enemies, and then you do some more kind of slow platforming. To be honest, it's not really that fast-paced.
The whole game is not that quick moving. There's usually enough time. Sometimes the enemies will like come in on like a ship or something. They'll like fly in, and it's like the animation's way too fast. But then they just get there and they just don't move. They just sit there, wait for you. But we've already played 3 versions of the Jungle theme, and
we've played 2 so far. But this third one's way different. This is from the Sega CD version. We're going back to Martin Iveson.
That was the jungle theme from the Sega CD version of Wolfchild, composed by Martin Iveson. Those, yeah.
It's a goofy track.
It's really silly. It's silly in all the best ways of the 80s, even though this game came out in the 90s.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about listening to these old CD audio track games is it's like they went overboard with every synth and sample patch they could, and it's clear they were having more fun playing around with the tools than writing music that worked in context. Like, this doesn't make any sense for the game. It really doesn't even make sense compared to the other versions. It's just like, all right, here you go. I like it though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I love it.
You were talking about animation earlier, Brian, and that's kind of interesting because that is something that Simon did bring up. And he says that creating the graphics was a tremendous fun and a great challenge. My first shot at creating and animating non-cartoon characters for a game. To conserve space on animations, I designed the characters to be split at the waist. This meant that the characters could negotiate the various slopes using only one set of shared leg animations. He also said that he got to use more of his flair on some of the more interesting animations, like warping into the stage, exiting the level, boss animations, things like that. And
the special power-up, too, was
and the special power-up. But yeah, I mean, like, I gotta say, for a first effort of animating something on this scale, it looks pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty old game at this point, but I never had any issues with the way the game looked. That looks pretty nice.
Not at all. I was kind of touting the Atari ST version, but the Amiga version as well is very clean. The animations are great. Colors are vibrant, really pretty. The level design is at times a little bit bland. But the characters and the enemies and stuff are really well thought out, really well detailed. I just wish they had a little more, movement from the enemy side, because they're just kind of static. Keeps bringing me back to Year Kung Fu. Guys fly off the screen.
There's not too much more to say from Simon Phipps's website, but I love this section because it pretty much talks about something that we were thinking about as we were writing the show, which is why are there so many freaking versions of this? So it says, the original version of the game was published on the Amiga and the ST in February of 92, but once released on one format, it never seemed to want to go away.
That's so funny.
With the arrival of JVC's Wonder Mega console, a souped-up variant of the Sega CD, we were asked to do a version for that. And to take advantage of the extra space, I created a new introductory sequence, which is like a much longer version of the wolf transformation scene that we talked about.
Which I don't think I've seen. Have you watched that?
Yeah, there's like a news report, like essentially your dad has been kidnapped, so you go into the laboratory and then maybe that's why
maybe that's always why I miss the story part of that, because
you just hit start so you can get to the music.
That's probably why.
And then he also mentions changing from 8 color sprites to 16 colors, and he says, then as now, it's always easier to draw your graphics highly detailed, remove detail and color, than it is to add it back in. And then they added a few extra stages and such to increase the playtime. And then came an SNES variant with even more colors. Finally, there was a Sega Game Gear and Master System conversion that saw the whole thing being cut down, resized, hacked in all manner of odd shapes, under the ingenious direction of programmer Sean Dunleavy, who made the Game Gear do things that, quite frankly, the Game Gear was never designed to do. I love the very British way of writing.
Yeah.
Here. It's just sort of surprised and sarcastic and sardonic all at once.
The Game Gear version, I mentioned that I think earlier, right? Or were we recording? Yeah. And it's quite awful, actually. There's no there's no real music in the game. There's none, and it's significantly easier. For one, by the time you get to the boss, you've only been playing for maybe a minute. It's not even that long. It just feels really horrible. Actually, it's not a very good version at all. And now that said, graphics are pretty good. Considering, Well,
that's true. They did look nice in screenshots.
But there's a lot of artifacts on the screen that are animated in other versions, and they're just, it just looks like you're against a backdrop. It doesn't really have any feeling to it. So it feels really bland, and it's very mediocre. So,
well, What can we say, Brian? It was 92. All of the kids were clamoring for Wolfchild, so everybody got it on every system. So that's where we ended up with that.
All right, no more jungle theme. So I think it's time we can move on to the temple. This is the Amiga version composed by Martin Iveson. All right, that was the temple theme, or stage 3, from the Amiga version of Wolfchild. This is a really cool track, and I remember the music a lot better than I remember the level. And I like how, you think it's just going to be looping for, 2 minutes in, and then it changes this really interesting, like, dun, da dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I like the change of pace. I think that adds to the aesthetic of the level, regardless of my memory of it. But it's a good track.
I really like the sort of, I don't know, there's a certain kind of captivating quality about this track. It's not like the best track ever or anything like that, but like just the rhythm is it grabs you in a really good way. And I think I'm not as familiar as you are probably, but I think other folks might know Martin Iveson as his other artist name of Atjazz. He's been writing electronic music soundtracks for ages. He's really good. I haven't listened to nearly as much of it as I like, but I can tell that this guy really had a flair for writing electronic music. I mean, he didn't even start using that label or that pseudonym until 96. So, I feel like he was already in a good place by 92, and then it's been 30 years since. I'm sure his recent stuff's really great. I should check it out. I should check more of his recent stuff out.
Yeah.
Have you heard it, Brian?
Several years back, I listened. I went through like the, typical rabbit hole of listening to like everything by everyone. And so I can't really recall, but I remember he did take a spin on some stuff, and it was a lot more, if I remember correctly, it was a lot more almost like acid jazzy.
I think some of it was, yeah.
But from stuff that you might know, we mentioned this earlier, from 91 to 2003, he did music for Chuck Rock 1 and 2, Jaguar XJ220, BC Racers, and the Tomb Raider games, 1, 2, and 3, and Angel of Darkness. Did you ever play like Fighting Force?
I did not. I remember the first one being pretty well received. I remember seeing it in a lot of stores for like the N64, I think.
It was really cool. It was like this kind of 3D Streets of Rage almost style beat 'em up. It was pretty cool at the time. I remember being pretty impressed by the graphics and just how well it looked. Back then, everything 3D was kind of impressive. He also did Fighting Force 2 and Shell Shock 2. Did you ever play the Shell Shock games?
I never played any of those.
Yeah,
no.
Shell Shock 2. I think that was on, I think it was Windows. But yeah, very different style from some of his other stuff. So,
Well, let's jump into our next composer. We've talked a lot about Matt Furniss, but here we are back at the temple again on the Genesis.
Thank you.
That was the Genesis version of the Temple, composed by Matt Furniss, and this one is a little bit more closely based on the Martin Iveson version for sure.
Right. Gotta say, this is probably my least favorite version, surprisingly, because a lot of the other Genesis stuff is great. I'm not a fan of the key change. It's just too frequent. It's like too early on, and then it changes again too early. You can't really get into the. Look, I'm all for a good key change, but like it just happens too soon.
It's not earned.
Yeah, it's not earned. Yeah.
If you're gonna do a direct key change, have like a Whitney Houston or something singing, so you really gotta get it. But here it's just like, oh, I guess we're in another key. Fine, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how much more we need to say about Furniss because we've had him on the show before, back in episode 58. We've done all sorts of like Furniss tracks over the time.
Of course, I mean he's done so many different things. He's kind of the man behind the secret Genesis soundtracks that sound good, like Lost Vikings, Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, Alien 3. I mean, if you look up Matt Furniss, especially from this era, you're going to be surprised, I think, if you didn't already know how good he was.
Yeah, I don't think anybody listening to the show is not going to know him at this point. So moving on to Temple on the Super Nintendo. Do we need to play the whole version of this, or you want to just listen to a little bit?
Well, we'll see in the magic editing how this ends up. So this is, again, as we mentioned at the top of the show, this is based on the Sega CD version, and this is transcribed down to the Super Nintendo. I wanted to give our man Steve Collett a little bit of a chance to shine. He did a good job with what he was given, so let's give a round of applause for Steve.
Well, let's hear the track first.
All right, we'll give him a round of applause after we hear the track. That was the Super Nintendo version of the song Temple, based on the Sega CD version by Martin Iveson.
That was awful.
Yeah, there's some funniness here. I think some of the bass samples don't quite match pitch.
It doesn't sound good at all.
But it does capture the cheesiness of the original.
Oh, definitely. That was the most closely, comparable, I guess. Yeah, it's not very good.
No, but in fairness to Steve, he's not as much of a musician these days. He's been a lot more on, sound effects in recent years. In fact, he just recently worked on a game that I played that I liked a lot called Murder by Numbers, which is an indie game that's kind of a cross between Sudoku and Phoenix Wright. It works better than you think, trust me. It's a fun little game. But he's still in the games industry, at least to some degree. I think he's a little bit more like independent freelance rather than working for a big company.
Well, in all fairness, too, like everybody has a dud. Not every track can be a hit. Right. And this was kind of a hard one to work with, too. So,
yeah. And keep in mind, the game released on 7 platforms in like a year and 4 months. I mean, like, everybody was working some late nights. This guy especially had like, you know what? Martin Iveson threw him a CD and said, "Here, transcribe this."
It's like, boy.
That's all he gave him. So,
anyways,
good job, Steve. You did the best you could.
So we're going to head back over to the Genesis. This is the Chimera bass track from stage 4, composed by Matt Furniss. All right, that was from the Chimera bass on the Sega Genesis for Wolfchild, composed by Matt Furniss. It's a pretty cool take on the version. I like the extra oomph in there for the bass line. I think that's another classic, signature of him. And definitely, it's a repetitive track, but at the same time, it's got like it's kind of got this nice groove to it. I like it.
I do like this track a lot. I feel like, that kind of fast-paced, heavy groove really works in its favor. I mean, we're getting towards the end of the game. There's only one more real stage. So this feels like the time to really, ramp up the intensity.
Yeah. So the next track we have here is also called Chimera Bass from the Amiga.
But this is now stage 5. They changed the levels a little bit around.
Yeah, it's kind of goofy here, but this is from stage 5. So let's take a listen.
That was the Chimera bass on the Amiga version, composed by Martin Iveson. This is the final stage. I really like this one a lot.
This is my favorite track in the game. 100%.
Kind of goes back to what I was saying, though. Martin Iveson's really heavy on the melodies, whereas, Matt Furniss is a little bit more on the kind of groove.
The funky? Yeah.
Yeah.
This track has been remixed more times than I could ever count. It's been in numerous crack intros and demo scene releases under various, iterations, and it has popped up. And I recognize this song immediately when I hear it or any take of it. And it's just forever stored and living in a cell of my brain. And I will continue hearing this for the rest of my life. I guarantee it.
Somehow I just put it together. You're right. I have heard, actually, I didn't have a lot of like cracked Amiga software or anything like that, but I remember hearing this somewhere in probably one of those like playlists of like Amiga crack tros. I'm like, I know this song. I don't remember from where.
You would have even seen this in like DOS and Windows crack tros and stuff. Absolutely.
I feel like I've heard. Yeah, you're right. I was like, why is it? I didn't really even realize why I kind of recognized it. Well, certainly I hadn't played this game all the way to the end, but I knew the melody. And you're right. I've heard probably remix 64 versions of this and various. Yeah, it's all over the place.
There was I think there was a Dreamcast demo group. If I can remember correctly, I'm trying to pull back, but I think I remember there was kind of a joke is they used this track in one of their crack intros as a throwback to this track, essentially. I mean, the group Chimera, the stage Chimera from Martin Iveson's version.
That's actually kind of cute.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. It's pretty rad. So yeah, and this track will make an appearance at some point again in some shape or form, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Now I want to play another version of the final stage. This is technically stage 8 on the Sega CD version because they added some stages. This is a completely different take. So let's take a listen. This is the Inner Core. That was Inner Core composed by Chris Hulsbeck for the game Jim Power. I mean, I feel like there was something going around, but no, that was Inner Core composed by Martin Iveson for the game Wolfchild, which we haven't said nearly enough this episode. I thought we were going to say Wolfchild all the time. Man Wolf.
Yeah, Man Wolf made an appearance more. Wolfchild.
I really like this track a lot, actually. But, I mean, it's just like that very classic, almost Japanese-inspired style melody writing. You know, what is that? Ease 3 has a track just like this. I like it a lot, but it's definitely, again, a track that almost doesn't belong in this game. At least compared to everything else that you've heard so far. Still a good piece of music. All those little choir oohs. Oh.
I didn't even think of Jim Power until you said it, and then now I can't unthink of it. It's a cool track. I like it.
It is. Yeah.
It's kind of an afterthought, I think. But maybe not, because the soundtrack was completely redone, and because they already had more stuff. Maybe there was just this, like, let's just keep the 90s power cheese rolling when they came up with it.
It's so charming to go back to, though. I mean, I admit I kind of hated this kind of stuff when I was young. Not this specific track, but some of the really like cheesy 90s stuff. And we got one more special one lined up for you, but obviously they don't make much music like this anymore, and they shouldn't have made it to begin with, but I'm glad that they did.
True. You know what we haven't heard from yet, though, is the Game Gear version.
Oh, yeah. And Brian, did you think you were going to get away from the Wolfship? Not today. We got one more Wolfship here.
Wait, I don't see it in our show notes. What are you talking about, Wolfship?
This is the ending theme from the Game Gear version. It's basically the Wolfship.
Oh, okay. Oh, boy. All right, let's take a listen. All right, that was the title and also the ending from the Game Gear version of Wolfchild, composed by Matt Furniss. This is definitely a spin on the Atari ST version. It's okay.
Yeah, it's not bad. The ending screen is literally just you and your dad sitting on a raft watching Chimera base exploding in the background. In every version of the game, pretty much. It's just like you're hanging out. You and your wolf dad.
And your wolf dad.
Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't know if he is a wolf man. He might just be a man.
It's not like the child of wolf, right?
No, he is a child of a man who is also a wolf, but it's not clear if his dad is a wolf. They don't go into it.
Trying to put this together in my head mentally, it does not compute.
Let's get into our second ending here. This is from the Sega CD version, and this is where you and your wolf dad hang out and freeze frame high five.
Let's take a listen. Oh God! Are you ready?
I'm ready.
That was the ending theme from the Sega CD version. Oh man, this is
The 80s called.
this is this reminds me of. Now I can't stop thinking about Michael J. Fox in what is it?
Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf.
Yeah, I was gonna make all sorts of Wolfman Jack and Teen Wolf jokes, but I just couldn't fit him in. There wasn't enough time. So,
and then when you're saying like you and your wolf dad like are freeze frame high fiving, it just works so well.
Yeah, I've been watching a little bit of Alf, much to my wife's dismay, and she's like, "Please stop! I hate this." So it's basically that same vibe. So if you've been missing those 80s TV theme songs, here you go.
Here you go. Today we covered Wolfchild on the Amiga, Atari ST, Genesis, Mega CD, Game Gear, which also includes the Master System, and the Super Nintendo, composed originally by Martin Iveson for the various versions, arranged by Matt Furniss for the Genesis, and transcribed by Steve Collett on the Super NES.
If you want to know more about the show, then check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for the show notes and the track list. And make sure to check out our Discord. That's always a great way to keep in touch with us, and there's chats usually pretty lively.
Yep. If you're new to our podcast, make sure you check out some of our past episodes, like our last show with Neil Biggin, 173, which was Super Mega Zero with DDR Kirby. Or if you like middle-of-the-road European platformers with great music, check out 167 Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge.
And, of course, Waterworld, another classic.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one, too. And then now you make me think of, like, we never did Earthworm Jim or anything, right? I guess we never did. No.
Although Earthworm Jim's actually a pretty good game. So...
We did Vector Man.
Yeah, Vector Man.
We did Vector Man.
Way back.
Yeah, we did Bob. Remember B.O.B.?
Oh, Bob is that fits right in there.
Yeah. Anyways, we got a really great track for you taking out the show. This is the Amiga version of the ending theme composed by Martin Iveson. Got anything else, Gene?
If you never hear Wolfchild again, it'll be too soon.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.